Have you ever stared at a person in power and asked yourself, how did that person get there? Not in awe, but in disbelief. Because let's be honest, sometimes it feels like the higher someone climbs, the less sense it makes. We've all seen it. The CEO who can't answer basic questions about their company, the political figure whose speeches are riddled with logical fallacies, the public figure whose decisions seem more reckless than reasoned, and yet they're leading. Meanwhile, the truly thoughtful, the competent, the capable, they're often buried beneath layers of obscurity, grinding in silence, while the spotlight shines on those with little more than noise to offer. It's a pattern so common, so painfully familiar, that it starts to feel intentional, as if the world somehow rewards ignorance and punishes wisdom. But what if that's not just a glitch in the system? What if there's a deeper, darker logic behind it? What if the very traits that make someone smart, self-aware, and ethical are the same traits that keep them out of power? Today, we're diving into a paradox that's not just philosophical, it's psychological, historical, and alarmingly relevant. A paradox that may finally explain why the incompetent so often rise while the brilliant get overlooked. To unravel it, we need to journey back to one of the most controversial minds in political history, Niccolo Machiavelli. In 16th century Florence, Machiavelli, exiled, disillusioned, stripped of political influence, sat down and wrote The Prince, a brutally honest guide to power. He didn't write about how leaders should behave. He wrote about how they do behave. He wasn't interested in idealism. He was obsessed with reality. And reality, he said, is cruel. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. With that one sentence, Machiavelli revealed a truth that underpins so many of history's power structures. Perception is more powerful than substance. That statement alone begins to explain why stupidity and power often go hand in hand. Because in the brutal game of influence, appearing competent often matters more than being competent. Machiavelli observes something deeply unsettling. Highly intelligent people, true thinkers, true visionaries, don't always fare well in positions of power. In fact, their intelligence can become a burden. Why? Because intelligence brings nuance. It brings questions. It brings self-doubt, ethical conflict, and the ability to see all sides of a situation. These are wonderful traits for truth-seeking, but in cutthroat power dynamics, they're liabilities. Think about what happens when a truly intelligent person enters a system of hierarchy or politics. They see complexity where others see simplicity. They hesitate where others blurt out confidence. They say, I'm not sure, while others proclaim, I have the answer. They take the time to think things through while someone else is already selling the answer, shaking hands, and sealing deals. In systems where confidence is king, where certainty wins arguments, and where boldness is mistaken for leadership, intellectual depth becomes a handicap. Consider the ancient contrast between Socrates and the populace of history. Socrates, the philosophical giant, openly declared, I know that I know nothing. He questioned everything. He refused to settle for easy answers. And what was his reward? Execution. Meanwhile, history has celebrated countless populist figures who stood in front of crowds and declared with full certainty that they had all the answers. They rose to power not because they were right, but because they were loud. That leads us to something even more unsettling. Modern psychological research is backing this up. In 2017, a controversial study published in the Journal of Management found that intelligence correlates positively with leadership effectiveness, but only up to a point. The magic number in IQ of a 120. Go above that, and the data suggests that additional intelligence can actually hurt your chances of emerging as a leader. Why? Because highly intelligent individuals often struggle to communicate with or inspire people who can't follow their complexity. They can appear distant, unrelatable, even condescending. So being too smart may not help you win power. It may keep you from even entering the race. But wait, it gets even more disturbing. If intelligence can hurt your chances of rising in leadership, what kind of traits actually help? This brings us to one of the most powerful and haunting psychological concepts of the last century, the Dunning-Kruger effect. You've probably seen it play out 1,000 times. The loudest person in the room, the one with the boldest opinions, the most confidence, the simplest solutions, somehow becomes the leader, even when they're completely wrong. In the 1990s, psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger identified a strange cognitive bias. The less competent someone is, the more likely they are to overestimate their abilities. Meanwhile, those who are truly skilled tend to underestimate themselves because they know just how much they don't know. As Shakespeare put it centuries earlier, the fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. This bias doesn't just exist in classrooms or social circles, it thrives in leadership structures. In 2020, a study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology confirmed that individuals who displayed overconfidence, regardless of their actual skill, were more likely to be viewed as leaders by their peers. What because humans are wired to associate certainty with competence. Confidence becomes a shortcut, a mental heuristic. When someone speaks with conviction, our brain assumes they must know what they're talking about, even if they don't. Take history's examples. General George Armstrong Custer. His unshakable confidence led to one of the most catastrophic military failures in U.S. history, yet he was beloved and promoted until the end. Elizabeth Holmes created a multi-billion-dollar company on tech that never worked but projected such unwavering vision that investors threw fortunes her way. Adam Newman of WeWork built a company around hype, charisma, and little substance, yet convinced the world he was a messianic entrepreneur. Masayoshi Son lost $70 billion on failed investments through SoftBank, but his confidence untouched. In all of these cases, confidence, not competence, won the game. And this isn't isolated to business or war. In countries around the world, especially those with fewer guardrails around leadership selection, narcissism becomes the winning trait. A 2012 study from Stanford and the University of Houston found that narcissism, defined by inflated self-view dominance and entitlement, was a better predictor of who would rise in unstructured groups than actual ability. The groups led by narcissists didn't perform better. They just thought they did. And that is the terrifying power of perception. We live in a world where brains are bypassed for bravado, where emotional intelligence is ignored for ego, where nuance loses to noise. It's not just unfair, it's systematic. And the reason is deeply human. Our ancestors used mental shortcuts to make survival decisions quickly. Confidence signaled clarity. Decisiveness meant strength. But in today's complex world, those same shortcuts lead us astray. And so we continue to mistake the bold for the wise, the loud for the capable, the certain for the correct. But this is just the beginning. If we now understand why stupidity rises, what does that mean for those of us who see deeper? What can you do if you're the thoughtful one, the measured one, the ethical one who feels trapped in a world that celebrates the opposite? In the next chapter, we'll explore how you can leverage this knowledge not to become manipulative, but to become strategic, to protect your power and perhaps finally take your place in a world that so often misunderstands quiet strength. Last time we saw how overconfidence, especially in the incompetent, can lift people into power. But that illusion is just the beginning. What happens once they're in? That's where the real danger begins. Overconfidence might get the wrong people into positions of power, but something much darker helps them stay there. It's not luck. It's a deliberate strategy, a self-reinforcing system that spreads like a virus inside institutions. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. In The Prince, he wrote, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him." This wasn't just a throwaway line. It was a warning. Machiavelli observed a phenomenon we still see today. Incompetent leaders often surround themselves with people even less competent than themselves. What? Because weak leaders fear being exposed. They fear being challenged. And above all, they fear being replaced. So instead of hiring people who are brilliant or bold, they choose loyalty. They choose flattery. They choose subordinates who won't question orders, even if those orders are destructive. This creates what organizational psychologists now call competence threatening. Thomas Chamorro Premuzic explains that insecure leaders often feel threatened by team members who are too capable. Instead of seeing talent as an asset, they see it as a threat. So they replace the talented with the safe, the bold with the bland. What results is a competence drought, a slow rot that begins at the top and seeps outward. History offers painful examples. In the court of Emperor Commodus, capable administrators were replaced by flatterers and entertainers. Rome, once a beacon of order, spiraled into chaos. In modern Brazil, the central political system institutionalized this very pattern. Appointments were made based on personal connections, not qualifications. Under Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe, competent civil servants were systematically removed and replaced by partisan loyalists. The result, economic devastation. This isn't random. It's the result of homophily, our tendency to associate with people who are like us. And in power structures that creates islands of incompetence, closed circles, where no one questions the leader and where failure becomes normalized. Think back to your own life. Have you ever worked in a company where asking questions was discouraged? Where raising concerns was seen as not being a team player? Where silence was safer than truth? That's the network effect in action. Incompetence becomes institutionalized. It's no longer just a bad boss. It's a bad system, one that punishes insight and rewards obedience. But why are so many of us drawn to these kinds of leaders in the first place? Why do we ignore wisdom and follow certainty? The comfort of certainty. Cognitive closure. Here's where psychology offers a disturbing answer. We crave certainty, especially in uncertain times. When things get scary, war pandemics, recessions, our minds want answers. Simple ones. And that need for simplicity can overpower our better judgment. Real experts, the people who actually know what they're talking about, usually speak in nuance. They say things like it depends, or there are trade-offs, or the answer isn't simple. But those answers don't comfort us. They frustrate us. Machiavelli once again saw this clearly. He wrote, "The great majority of mankind are satisfied with appearances as though they were realities and are often more influenced by the things that seem than by those that are." In other words, we don't follow truth, we follow certainty, even when it's fake. In times of crisis, we rarely follow the leader who says, "This is a complex issue with no easy answers." Instead, we rally behind the one who stands up and says, "I alone can fix this. Here's the answer. It's simple." That message is psychologically satisfying. It creates the illusion of control, the illusion of stability, even when the leader doesn't know what they're doing. You see this everywhere. Take climate change. Scientists speak in probabilities, ranges, and long-term strategies. They offer cautious, evidence-based answers. Meanwhile, loud political figures on both sides reduce it to absolutes. It's a hoax, or it's already too late. Guess which one gets more attention? Healthcare. Same thing. Doctors and policy experts explain complex trade-offs, cost access, quality feasibility. Politicians promise everything instantly with zero downsides. Guess which one gets more votes? The psychological phenomenon behind this is known as cognitive closure. Our mental preference for clear, definite answers over ambiguity. Studies show that when people feel uncertain or threatened, their need for closure skyrockets. They become more likely to embrace black and white thinking and more receptive to authoritarian figures who offer strong, clear narratives. And here's the twist. The smarter you are, the more dangerous this gets. In a 2017 Yale study, participants were asked to interpret complex policy data. Those with high math skills didn't always reach the right answer. They often twisted the data to fit their existing political beliefs. That's right, their intelligence made them better at justifying their bias. So it's not just that simple answers are appealing, it's that our minds are wired to find comfort in them and to defend them even against evidence. It's like a psychological immune system failure. Just when we need the most nuanced thinking, we become most vulnerable to shortcuts, slogans, and certainty. And here's the hardest part. This is true even for you. Ask yourself, have you ever been drawn to a simple explanation precisely because it was simple? Even when something inside you knew the truth was more complicated, that's this principle at work inside your own brain. But now we face an even more uncomfortable reality, one that Machiavelli laid bare. Because intelligence isn't the only thing that limits people in power. What if the biggest obstacle to intelligent people rising isn't how they think, but how they feel? What if the very thing that makes someone moral is what keeps them out of power? In the next section, we'll dive into the most controversial idea Machiavelli ever wrote, the belief that morality itself may be a disadvantage in political life. Stay tuned. As we've seen, our craving for certainty makes us vulnerable to overconfidence and simplification. But what if there's another force even more insidious, keeping intelligent moral individuals out of power? What if it's not a matter of capability, but a matter of conscience? Moral constraints as handcuffs in the game of power. Intelligent people often develop complex moral reasoning, an inner compass shaped by awareness, empathy, and integrity. But in the ruthless arena of power, these virtues can become obstacles. Because in any competitive environment, the person willing to cross ethical lines who feels no burden of conscience has access to tactics that the morals simply won't use. They can lie without flinching. They can manipulate, deceive, betray. They can stoke fear and division while smiling in public. And that opens a brutal advantage. Consider ancient Rome. Two towering figures, Cicero, the philosopher, the orator, the statesman, and Julius Caesar, the military genius, unbound by tradition. Cicero, brilliant and principled, believed in law, debate, and reason. Caesar, he crossed the Rubicon both literally and figuratively, knowing full well that breaking sacred norms would trigger civil war. But Caesar didn't hesitate. He understood what Cicero wouldn't dare act on. That power favors those unburdened by restraint. The same dynamic plays out in modern times. Think of political races where ethical candidates struggle to defend themselves against smear campaigns, manipulated narratives, or outright lies. The morally grounded hesitate to attack while their opponents weaponize character assassination with ease. In organizations, too, this pattern holds. A University of British Columbia study found that individuals with psychopathic traits, specifically a lack of empathy and remorse, can rise rapidly in leadership when combined with surface-level charm. Why? Because these traits allow them to act without internal resistance. They take bold steps, cut corners, use people, and they do it with a smile. Their charm masks the danger. Their decisiveness is mistaken for strength. This trend isn't limited to one region or culture. In China, the Shengnu archetype, a ruthless businesswoman who breaks all social expectations, has come to represent a rising figure in power circles. In Nordic countries, despite a deep cultural value placed on collaboration and equality, studies show that manipulative leaders still outpace their more ethical counterparts when it comes to advancement. This creates what game theorists call a race to the bottom. When unethical behavior is rewarded, others must either adapt or be eliminated. The system itself starts to mutate, pressuring even principled actors to bend their ethics just to stay competitive. Eventually, cutting corners becomes the norm. Integrity becomes an obstacle, and manipulation becomes strategy. But this doesn't mean we're doomed. Not all environments reward manipulation, some actively punish it. So the next question becomes, what kind of systems protect against this moral decay? Different environments, different rules. Machiavelli understood something that modern political scientists now confirm: different environments select for different traits. Some naturally favor competence. Others are breeding grounds for corruption and incompetence. So what determines which way a system evolves? 1. Feedback loops and accountability. In fields where feedback is immediate and consequences are clear, incompetence cannot hide for long. Take a surgeon. If patients die, their failure is obvious. An engineer whose bridges collapse won't keep their job. In these domains, performance is measurable. Reality cannot be spun. So these systems self-correct. They reward genuine skill. But in politics, in bureaucracy, in media, feedback is slow, consequences are blurred. Failures can be blamed on predecessors, external threats, or the media. Incompetence can thrive indefinitely when accountability is vague. 2. Institutional design. Power systems with strong checks and balances resist corruption. Those without them collapse from within. The Soviet Union, for example, centralized decision-making in unaccountable hands. Information was censored. Criticism punished. The result, collapse. In contrast, Germany's dual board system separates management and oversight. It's harder for one manipulative figure to hijack the system unchecked. 3. Complexity and information asymmetry. In simple systems, merit wins. But the more complex a system becomes, the harder it is for outsiders to judge performance. In such cases, style trumps substance. Machiavelli wrote, "Men judge more by the eye than by the hand because it belongs to everyone to see, but to few to understand." The more ambiguous the task, the more power shifts to those who look the part rather than those who are the part. 4. Incentive structures. What gets rewarded gets repeated. If a company rewards quarterly profits, leaders will chase short-term gains even if it hurts the long-term health of the business. The 2008 financial crisis was fueled by this very logic. Bonuses were tied to risky gains, not sustainable value. And so greed won. In your own life, ask yourself, what gets measured? Who gets rewarded? Are outcomes visible or vague? Understanding these structural rules allows you to anticipate who's likely to rise and who's likely to be left behind. But even in well-designed systems, psychological manipulation can allow incompetent leaders to maintain control. Psychological tactics that cement incompetence. Incompetent leaders don't stay in power by accident. They use a playbook, one Machiavelli himself would instantly recognize. Tactic 1, exploit tribalism. By creating us versus them dynamics, leaders transform criticism into identity attacks. Suddenly, questioning the leader becomes betrayal, not of a person, but of a group, a cause, a nation. Psychologists call this identity fusion, when a leader's image becomes inseparable from the identity of their followers. Challenge the leader and people feel personally attacked. History gives us chilling examples. Jim Jones, the cult leader who led over 900 people to mass suicide, fused identity so completely that dissent became treason. Najib Razak in Malaysia, accused of massive corruption, maintained support by playing on ethnic divisions. Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil used tribal polarization to survive repeated controversies, turning facts into opinion and loyalty into immunity. Tactic 2, overwhelm with chaos. When incompetent leaders can't govern effectively, they create noise, constant crises, shifting narratives, emotional overload. This tactic floods our minds. When we're busy processing outrage after outrage, we lose the bandwidth for critical thought. Chaos becomes a distraction, a cloud that hides failure. Tactic 3, use doublethink. As Orwell warned, the most dangerous leaders make you believe two contradictory things at once. They change their positions constantly. They rewrite their past statements. They deny facts that they said yesterday. The result, confusion. In this fog, truth becomes subjective. Reality becomes flexible. And accountability dissolves. Machiavelli put it bluntly. The vulgar crowd is always taken by appearances. He wasn't insulting ordinary people. He was naming a vulnerability we all share. Our brains weren't built for this level of complexity, speed, and manipulation. So now we understand the layers. Confidence over competence. Simplicity over nuance. Immorality over restraint. Chaos over clarity. But if this is how power works, what hope is left for the intelligent, for the murhe, for those who see and feel too much? In the final section, we explore the ultimate question: how can systems and individuals resist this descent into manipulation? And more importantly, how can you stay with me? So far, we've seen how incompetent leaders don't just stumble into power, they seize it through a playbook of manipulation, division, and illusion. But their rise isn't only about psychological tactics. There's one more factor we must confront: the vulnerability of our systems and of ourselves. How economic pressure becomes a gateway to manipulation. In times of chaos, fear creates cracks in our defenses. And nothing exposes those cracks more predictably than economic stress. When people feel insecure, when their livelihoods are threatened, their futures uncertain, they become increasingly vulnerable to leaders who offer simple answers to complex problems. Sound familiar? From post-industrial towns in the U.S. Midwest to rural regions in Europe, economic despair has fueled the rise of leaders who trade nuance for slogans, analysis for scapegoats. These leaders don't solve problems, they redirect frustration. Instead of facing structural realities, they serve up convenient enemies: immigrants, elites; foreign nations, the media. And people listen, because when your economic survival is at stake, certainty feels better than complexity, even if it's an illusion. Think of your own media habits. How often do you find yourself pulled into the latest outrage? A headline designed to provoke, distract, or divide. This, too, is by design. It's not just incompetence at work, it's infrastructure. Recognizing these patterns is the first step. But awareness alone won't save us. We need tools, real practical tools to resist manipulation and to reshape our systems from the inside out. The first defense against manipulation, at the individual level, awareness is our best armor. If manipulation is the disease, awareness is the immune response. But it doesn't come naturally, it takes practice, it demands discipline. Let's break it into 3 key practices. 1. Cultivate intellectual humility. True strength lies in admitting what we don't know. Studies show that intellectually humble individuals are less likely to fall for misinformation. They evaluate arguments based on merit, not charisma. They don't assume expertise, they seek it. Intellectual humility functions like a cognitive immune system. It filters out false certainty the same way your body filters out viruses. In a world drowning in overconfidence, humility is revolutionary. 2. Build media literacy. Not all information is equal. We must learn to distinguish depth from noise. This means choosing your information sources deliberately, questioning not just what is said, but how and why it's said, prioritizing clarity over spectacle. As Warren Buffett put it, really successful people say no to almost everything. That includes clickbait. That includes rage-driven headlines. That includes voices that shout but never explain. A wise thinker filters what enters the mind, just like a wise eater filters what enters the body. 3. Embrace reflection. In ancient times, philosophers practiced daily reflection, pausing to examine values, reactions, and intentions. The Stoics called it evening review. Francis Bacon called it the art of creating opportunities. Today, it's the habit of stepping back from the noise and asking what matters. Without reflection, we become passive consumers of thought. With it, we become architects of our beliefs. Institutional strategies that resist incompetence. But personal practices are only half the story. Systems matter. If the architecture of power is broken, no amount of personal virtue can fully protect us. So how do we design institutions that are resilient not to perfection, but to the very real threat of incompetence? Here are 3 pillars every healthy system needs. 1. Accountability. Power without oversight invites disaster. The Boeing 737 MAX tragedy was not a technological failure. It was a failure of institutional courage. Engineers raised concerns, but leadership chasing profit ignored them. And the board, they rubber-stamped it all. Contrast that with organizations that empower whistleblowers, where oversight boards function independently, where truth can't be buried by charisma. True accountability isn't about punishment. It's about early detection, about feedback loops that prevent failure from becoming fatal. 2. Cognitive diversity. Homogeneous teams don't just lack creativity, they lack accuracy. When everyone thinks alike, blind spots grow. Diverse perspectives challenge assumptions. They disrupt groupthink. This isn't about ideology, it's about epistemology, about how we know what we know. The best systems bring different minds to the table, not for political correctness, but for intellectual completeness. 3. Transparency. Secrecy protects incompetence. Complexity can be used as camouflage. Transparency, on the other hand, turns on the light. From government sunshine laws to financial conflict disclosures in healthcare, transparency forces leaders to account for their actions in public view. And when people know they'll be seen, they act more carefully. Education is the thread that weaves all this together. Not just vocational training, not just technical skill, but critical thinking, ethical reasoning. The kind of wisdom that built Plato's Academy and fueled the Florentine Renaissance. Great societies don't just produce workers, they cultivate citizens. A return to Machiavelli. So now at the end of our journey, we return to the man who started it all, Niccolo Machiavelli. For centuries, he's been painted as a cynic, a schemer, a cold-blooded puppet master of political manipulation. But perhaps we misunderstood him. Machiavelli wasn't celebrating corruption. He was diagnosing it. He didn't advocate for the abuse of power, he sought to understand it so that we could design better systems. It is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles. Power means nothing on its own. It only has meaning when used wisely. Machiavelli's gift was honesty. Brutal, unsentimental, unapologetic honesty about human nature. And today we need that clarity more than ever. Because the truth is hard. Yes, incompetence sometimes rises. Yes, moral courage can be a handicap. Yes, our systems are vulnerable. But that doesn't mean we surrender. It means we build better tools, better defenses, better minds. Intelligence alone isn't enough. But intelligence coupled with integrity, with courage, might be the only thing that ever truly changes the world. So ask yourself, where do you see these dynamics playing out in your life? In your workplace, your community, your country? And what will you do with this understanding? Let us know in the comments. And if this video gave you a new lens on power and psychology, consider subscribing because the more we see clearly, the more light we bring to a dark world. Until next time, remember, understanding the darkness doesn't mean accepting it. It means knowing how to build the light.